And welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market. And just before the break, I made a comment about encroaching socialism and encroaching liberty. And Jim, you had a comment you wanted to make on that.
Yes, I wanted to pick up on that because it makes either socialism or liberty as if these were choices that people could make in like one day, as you said, or 100 days. Actually, or that they are programs that people implement in devious ways and so forth. And my approach in the book, that Six Political Illusions, has a really different thesis about where socialism comes from. And Edward Bellamy, the fellow we're talking about, is kind of the classic example. He was not a conspirator. He was not a fifth columnist working for the Soviet Union or anything like that. He just saw what he thought he saw at first. That is, he was completely overcome by these illusions. And this is what keeps socialism going. And this is why, for instance, if the Communist Party dissolves or whatever in Russia, it doesn't mean the illusions are gone. They're still there at work, and they are keeping the state going with all the intrusions and so forth. The belief that government can fix things, should fix things, has the power to fix things, that it is wealthy, and all of those illusions. So you're not going to just pass a law and say stop it. People still are going to come back to it until they finally overcome the illusions.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. And when we were talking about Dr. Maltsev's one-day plan, he, of course, was being extremely optimistic in that, and we weren't at all under the illusion that, and I can speak for him, that he wasn't under any illusion that this would happen via the stroke of a pen or in one day, a sudden bolt of enlightenment. But certainly it does bring out the point that we must be recognizing that encroaching socialism is happening, and it is continuing to happen. And as we like to say here at Radio Free Market, we have to stand up for freedom, and we have to stand up for it in many different ways. And actually, having you on our show is, I think, a very significant step in that, because helping people to understand that there are these illusions that they can break themselves from, starts that conversation, broadens that conversation, and allows more people to perhaps break themselves from those illusions.
Right.
So, Aaron, you had a comment you wanted to make as well.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I think it was somewhere in the middle of the chapter, my eyes kind of popped out of my head, and I wrote a sentence that you wrote, and it's very true. You wrote, efforts to implement a socialist utopia through government have cost rivers of blood. And it was just a really striking statement. Why is that? Why do attempts to implement, this socialist kind of ideal, why is it always so violent?
Because government is based on force. I mean, you would expect that. And people like Lenin, by the way, Mao and Lenin, these people knew that and said it and were very pleased with it. They were of a different generation. And they were very happy to kill plenty of people to get what they thought would be the regime that they dreamed of. Mm-hmm. But what happened has happened is that the what they call democratic socialists or the European or liberal socialists have swept under the rug the force aspect of it, but it's still there.
Yeah, we've referred people many times to the book by R.J. Rummel on Death by Government, which documents the 262 million innocent people, not military combatants, but innocent people that were murdered in the 20th century by their governments. And I recommend, of course, that book, but it's not easy reading, for sure. But we know, as we've talked about this among ourselves, that some people object and say, but this is the price we all pay to live in a civilized society. How would the world survive if we didn't pay taxes and have a big government? How would you respond to this objection?
Well, we had a small government 125 years ago, and the world survived. I would do it one at a time. It's what people are often pointing to on that argument is that there will be violent aggressors and gangs of crooks and so forth that will attack people, and they have to be restrained. And if that function of restraining them, is given to this thing we call government, then that becomes a kind of a legitimate or acceptable activity and needed activity. But the question of whether you needed all the rest, I mean, did you need the National Endowment for the Arts? I mean, how did that get in there?
Right. So
there's a great, when you read the book, you'll realize what Dr. Payne is saying. He makes a great commentary on the National Endowment for the Arts. But the next, it was great. I had a good time with that. The next chapter was on the illusion of the frictionless state, and the whole chapter is an excellent economic commentary in particular. But one instance really highlights the crux of this topic, and that is that numerous studies have shown that it costs government twice as much or more money as a private business to deliver the same service. Public schools cost twice as much per pupil. I'm from California. I can tell you firsthand they do not offer twice as much learning, but they offer twice as much. What is your thinking as to why government needs multiple more resources and labor to deliver a product that is not nearly as good as what could be offered by a private firm?
Right. Well, remember, there's two sides to this. It's the getting the money, which it gets through taxation, and the overhead costs of that, which are almost totally ignored in all discussions of government programs. And then there's the different kinds of waste and that overconsumption and so forth that occur in the disbursement. The basic underlying thing is, I suppose, two factors. One is that you don't have this market where people can withdraw. They can say, well, I don't like that product. And secondly, you don't have the market where they can say, it's not worth this to me with my money. In other words, you take their money away from them first, and then whatever comes out the other end, it's no longer in their power to choose or not.
So let's move on to the materialistic illusion. In your next chapter, you talk about how it is a common fallacy that government money lifts people out of poverty. Would you discuss this a little bit?
Well, right. The materialistic illusion is the broad statement of it is that money buys public policy results. So if there's anything you think you want, from green energy to the end of poverty, then if you're under this illusion, you'll say, well, we'll just appropriate enough money for it and we'll get it. And the fallacy in that is that every problem-solving or creative activity involves, yes, resources, the material resources, but there's also got to be intelligence and control and purpose and systems of evaluation at work. So if you forget about those, and then you're going to come to a very unhappy end. Now, in the case of poverty, yes, it was astonishing to see grown-up people in the 60s say that we can end poverty just by pumping enough money to raise everybody above the poverty line, without thinking that if people are poor, there's a whole complex of needs and personalities and psychologies and decision-making and so forth that's going on that have to do with why people are poor. And they, say, more or less forgot all about that.
So, Aaron, you wanted to also bring out the next one, the watchful eye illusion. Please go ahead.
Okay, so the watchful eye illusion is that you gave a quote from President Obama, and he said of the free market, he said its power to generate wealth and expand freedom is unmatched. But this crisis, he was talking about the financial crisis of 2008, this crisis has reminded us that without a watchful eye, the market can spin out of control, end quote. And the market is made up of people, so implicitly he means that free individuals can spin out of control if the government doesn't keep a watchful eye on it.
Right.
Can you explain where did this idea come from, that the government is supposed to be this watchful, or even has the ability to be this watchful eye?
Yeah, where it really comes from in the beginning is maybe obscure, maybe human beings. It comes from God worship idea that human beings have somewhere in their psyche the supposition there must be something out there that knows enough to control this situation and figure it out and do the right thing and so forth. And of course for ages this was God. Well, and of course God was running the state through God-appointed people. And that kind of impulse is still at work, so that, and this is the fascinating thing, no matter how many times you see the government fail to do something, you don't say, well, I guess we were wrong about our supposition. You know, if we had a witch doctor who said he could cure people and he waved a red stick over the head of the sick person, the person got sick and died, we'd say, well, this witch doctor doesn't know what he's doing. This is baloney. Well, we've done that, like in terms of the economy. The first one was the Federal Reserve, which was set up in 1913, and you know the speech Wilson gave is it was supposed to end these business depressions. And so it didn't. So did people say, well, that's a mistake, let's disband the Federal Reserve? No, they said, let's have more agencies, you know, the SEC and so forth. And we've gone 100 years with more and more agencies that are supposed to control, be the watchful eye of the economy, and we still keep crashing. And people cannot say, well, that must be a mistake. And I say it's this watchful eye illusion, the presumption that government officials or government, as soon as you start talking about people, you start seeing some problem. But government will have some wisdom, and economists are doing this all the time. They theorize always about how some government intervention should correct some market failure and so forth. And they never stop to think, who are the guys in government? What kind of people are they? How smart will they be, and how corrupt and so forth?
So, Jim, I want to jump in here, and I'd like to say that this particular question, or excuse me, chapter, Watchful Eye, I thought was one of the most important because it reminded me of this, the fictional eye of Mordor, the evil eye that watches over everything, not the divine eye, as you had just discussed in your previous point. And but you started to bring out this idea that government, people think that government has greater knowledge and wisdom than the public, but, you know, government is just made up of people. They're not any wiser or better than any other human beings. And I think a good point that you made in reference in your book to the housing bubble was that government officials participated in the housing bubble just like everyone else. So please comment on that for a second, if you would, please.
Sure. Yeah, to go back to the definition of the watchful eye, it's the illusion. It's the idea that government has greater wisdom than the public, that there's some kind of super brain at work here that can solve problems that we don't solve. And of course, as you say, Michael, the way to penetrate this is to realize that the phrase government is an abstraction. Government always acts through people, and these are ordinary human beings like ourselves. The best way to correct the watchful eye illusion, if you're going to say, like, government should do something, it should regulate housing or whatever, is to put the caveat before you say it, assuming that the government workers doing this regulating, assuming they are alert, assuming they are thoughtful, energetic, responsible, assuming they are not lazy, assuming they are not complacent, and so forth, assuming they're not corrupt, then these government officials should regulate, you know, X. If you put it that way, that penetrates the watchful eye illusion a lot.
Right, and that makes an awful lot of assumptions they got to overcome.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So, Aaron, please go ahead. You had one. We want to get through this next one fairly quickly on the calculation problem issue. Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Ludwig von Mises was one of the great Austrian economists, made his famous socialist calculation argument, which is that socialists can't calculate. The government just can't calculate. It's just impossible, like you were saying, for the government to have this super brain. How is government trying to direct the economy different from private business in a decentralized way influencing the economy?
Right. Right, exactly. I mean, I think the point stands for itself. An example I use is like even helping poor people. If you had 100 poor people, as people in some kind of needy state, and you really started looking into it, you would see that each one of these 100 people had a kind of different kind of problem and needed a different kind of approach. So you'd really need 100 different people, friends, relatives, parents, whatever, grappling with each one. And the idea that you can, cut all those individuals out of it and have some centralized mind in government decree how those 100 people should be treated, that's extremely unrealistic.
Mm-hmm. And yes, exactly. And that's...
We're going to I'm going to actually introduce this next one, and then we're going to take our final break. You won't have much time to respond to this, and when we get back from the break, I'm going to have you, Aaron, develop it a little bit more. But the final illusion that you list, Jim, in your book is the illusion of government preeminence. And your book pretty well dismantles the fallacious idea that people have, fallacious ideas that people have about government. But this last chapter, I think, is the most important, that human beings are problem-solving beings. And that the worst thing that we can do is to fall under the illusion that of government preeminence, which is the belief that government is the only problem-solving institution in society. And so, as I say, we're not going to have enough time in this segment to have you respond to that or develop that. And so when we get back from our break, folks, we will have Dr. Payne respond to that particular point in our final segment. And so please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market. I'm your host, Michael McKay, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Due to technical difficulties, we wound up with an extra chunk of time, which we're going to use to promote my book, Secrets About Money That Put You at Risk. Why is money the thing that most of us worry about the most, and yet the thing that you understand and were educated in school about the least? As David Gordon, one reviewer, has stated, I have described in a compelling fashion in my book the essential truths about money which everyone needs to know. Once you read this book, money will no longer seem mysterious. And Dr. Ron Paul has said, Secrets About Money by Michael McKay is a great summary that needs to be read by as many members of Congress as possible.
And welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and we are talking with Dr. Jim Payne on the 6 illusions of government. And Aaron Brown, our special commentator, had a question for Dr. Payne just before the break. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so right before the break, we were talking about the illusion that government is the only problem-solving institution in society. And Frederick Bastiat had a good quote on this, that every time we object to things being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all, and that's simply not true. What is your, your objection to that? That when people say act like government is the only problem-solving institution.
Right. And of course it isn't, but it's obscure. The other institution, or it's not an institution, it's a realm. I call the voluntary sphere. It's everything else that goes on, from what mothers do with their children to churches and volunteer groups and businesses, of course, and big businesses, small businesses, whatever. This is all independent action, and it is always working away at solving human problems and making the world a better place. But since it's so decentralized, people don't think of it as a problem-solving system, so that when something is going wrong, like you'd say American education isn't working so well, people's attention goes to kind of this big centralized institution, government, as the problem solver. So what you have to do, here's the problem that, and conservatives are constantly being trapped by this, is they're against something like, say, more spending for education, more tax spending on education. And then people say, well, what? You want children not to learn and so forth? And they kind of hem and haw here. And the way out of this trap is to start pointing to and emphasizing and extolling and reporting on the voluntary sphere, all the private initiatives that people are doing, which is not done. And I have to say, also I see among libertarians this is not done very much. There's plenty of criticism of government and government programs, but you've got to extol the alternative, which is any kind of voluntary, whether it's business or a volunteer group or whatever, to show the world that there is another way that this can be handled.
Right. You know, I think what you're getting to is something that I like to emphasize, that those of us that are promoters of what I like to call peaceful cooperation really have a bag full of tricks that we can pull out. We can use persuasion, we can use education, we can use example, and we can use action. But complaining and kvetching is not very useful.
Right.
So I really endorse your solution.
There's I don't know if you know about World Magazine, the Christian News Weekly.
You do now.
It's kind of like a Time magazine, but it's Marvin Olasky is the editor. Kind of quite conservative, but Christian oriented. But one of the things they do is they feature really remarkable charities that are doing important and impressive work. They have a contest, and out of hundreds, they get 5 winners, and they feature them in there and so forth. And that's an example of extolling what you can do without going through the coercive system of government.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Jim Payne, for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Greatly appreciate it. And also I want to thank Mr. Aaron Brown, who organized and prepared this show's content. All right, folks, this is Michael McKay and Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can subscribe for free to all of our shows on iTunes or visit our Radio Free Market archives for easy downloads. And until next week, folks, wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening.